I have tried many synths over my 10 years as a synth YouTuber, and there are a couple that I keep coming back to. The Minilogue, for example, and its brother, the Minilogue XD. They are just excellent synths, and I think they represent some of the best we've got in terms of synth design, because they're immediate, hands-on, and whether or not you like the sound of the original Minilogue, you can still always appreciate how immediate it is. And the thing is, even though I have more expensive synths in my studio and synths with more functions and synths that might even sound better, I still often gravitate towards synths like the Minilogue. And sometimes I feel like with these flagship synths, these big fantastic synths, I'm barely scratching the surface of what it can do. I'm not using all of its functionality. Whereas with the Minilogue, I feel like I'm constantly pushing it to its limit. And I don't know, that feels good. I don't know if that makes any sense. And over the 10 years that I've been a synth YouTuber, there has been few synths that have come close to rival the Minilogue as my favorite synth. But today might be the day that we've finally found a worthy adversary to the Minilogue. I'm not a big classics fan when it comes to synths, but there's just a vibe here that I really enjoy. Like this pad here, it has a subtle quality to it. And I really like this sound here, and I think it shows off the synth very well. So why do I like the TEO-5 so much? Well, firstly, I want to disclose that Sequential sent over the TEO-5 to me, and I think I spent about 6 months just exploring it. I didn't want to rush a review of it. And here's the TLDR, the 5 reasons why I like it so much. Firstly, it sounds really, really good. Secondly, it has a fantastic workflow, and that is something we're gonna focus a lot on in today's video. Thirdly, it has a modulation matrix, something we'll also explore. Fourth reason is that it has through zero FM, and later in the video I'll demo that, and it is quite different from regular FM. And the fifth reason is that it's analog in all the right places. So it's not a totally analog synth. I believe the oscillators are analog, the filter is analog, but the VCA, well, it's not a VCA, it's a digital amp stage, I believe, and there's digital effects. And yes, I would have loved analog distortion on it, but it is analog where it matters, and that makes a huge difference in terms of sound. I even used it to make some actual BoBeats beats, if you can imagine that. I had originally started working on this beat back when I got the Minilogue, the original one, but I wasn't happy, not 100% with the synth sounds. There was also a lot of noise on some recordings. So when the TEO-5 arrived, I felt like this could be a really good synth for this beat. And what you're hearing are drums from a Machina sample pack, bass from the original Minilogue, and layered pad sounds and arpeggio from the TEO-5. And yeah, this is the answer to the question, what kind of music do I make with my synths? I'm not sure if you like it, but I kinda dig it, and I will try and release it using today's sponsor, DistroKid. Releasing your music shouldn't be difficult, and using DistroKid is super easy and is a fast and reliable way of getting your tracks onto Spotify, Apple Music, Tidal, and other relevant stores. And one thing that I really like is that you pay once a year and then you can upload unlimited amounts of music. One feature that I really like is the hyperfollow feature. So when you've uploaded your music, you get a custom page. DistroKid does this automatically. On that page are links to where people can find your music in different stores. You can just share that one link instead of sharing like multiple links to different stores. So it's just a place where everything's gathered. So if you want to go and check out DistroKid, use my link in the description. You not only support my channel, but you also get a discount. So go and check it out. Something I want to do a little bit more frequently in my videos is comparing synths, because I think it's easier to understand the relative value of something compared to something else. So here we have the Minilogue, the trusted old Minilogue that I've used for many, many years. It's a relatively affordable analog polysynth, and there's also the Minilogue XD. And I'm going to do a little bit of an overview here of the TEO-5 and also compare it a little bit with the Minilogue, just so you understand kind of what you're getting for your money. And just so we are on the same page, the Minilogues are these more entry-level, beginner-friendly, and a little bit more, well, relatively speaking, budget-friendly synths. Whereas the Take-5 and the TEO-5 are mid-tier analog polysynths, and they are much more expensive, like double the price of the Minilogues. So why even compare them? Well, I think it's very interesting to ask ourselves what we're getting for the additional money. Just like on the Take-5, we have full-sized keys, and it's also a Fatar keybed. It actually feels very good. And if you compare it to the Minilogue, you can see here they have these slim keys. They are totally fine, but they're definitely not as good as on the larger Take-5 and TEO-5. In terms of voices, we have 5 voices on the TEO-5 and Take-5, it's in the name, and on the Minilogues we have 4 voices. And I do notice the voice stealing a lot more on the Minilogues versus the TEO-5, and I think this could be because the TEO-5 has a digital amp stage, whereas on the Minilogues I do believe it's VCAs, so analog. And on TEO-5 you have 2 analog oscillators with a sub-oscillator and noise, and on this one you have 2 oscillators and noise, and on the Minilogue XD we have 2 oscillators plus an expandable digital oscillator that you can load your own custom oscillators into, which is something that neither of these two have, and it's something that definitely sets the XD apart. And in terms of sound, I don't really think that the original Minilogue can compete with something like the TEO-5 or Take-5. I think they do sound objectively a lot better for the most part. Even though the Minilogue is analog, it's known for this kind of metallic, almost clangy tone, which is very cool, but perhaps not something that a lot of people enjoy. And if I compare it to the XD in terms of sound, I don't really think it can compete with the TEO-5 and Take-5 either, but I do think that the Minilogue XD still sounds very, very good, especially if you consider the price versus the TEO-5 and Take-5. In terms of the filter, there's really no competition. The filter on the TEO-5 is really good. It's a state variable filter, and you can see here we can have it set to low pass, to notch, and high pass. There's also a setting in the menu that turns it into a bandpass filter. And just to show you the difference in the filter, notice how there's this stepping in the filter. It's not as smooth. but it doesn't self-oscillate regardless how much you crank the resonance. In terms of overall feel, you know, turning, twisting the knobs, the TEO-5 and TEO-5 just feel slightly better than something like the Minilogue or Minilogue XD. The knobs just have a lot of resistance to them and feel very nice. The Minilogue and the XD and the TEO-5 and the TEO-5 all have an arpeggiator and a sequencer. But there's no real competition here. The sequencers on the Minilogues are just way better. Where the sequential fives win, however, is in terms of the modulations. So you have two LFOs over here, one is mono, one is poly. Poly means that it will trigger differently for each note being pressed. And then you have two envelopes over here assignable to different things. You can also use a mod matrix here to assign things very freely. The Minilogues just doesn't have that. Everything's basically normalized. So in short, I think that the TEO-5 and TEO-5 are just better sounding synths overall than the Minilogues. However, the Minilogues are very well priced and they do have a lot of similar functionality, but you have a lot more modulation options. These are way more powerful synths in terms of sound design. And in this overview section, I wanted to mention a few other negatives. We have these plastic sides here. Yeah, they don't feel too good. Otherwise, it's a very nicely built synth. There are a couple of things buried in the menus, for example, the voice panning. We also have to mention the price. It's not an inexpensive synthesizer, but I don't think there are a ton of cheaper alternatives that will scratch the same itch because this just sounds very good. And I would have loved additional envelopes, like one additional envelope and one additional LFO could just be a mono LFO in the menus. And like I said, the effects section is just okay. I would have loved more options when it comes, for example, to the reverb. Many different kinds of reverbs, for example. While the Oberheim TEO-5 and the Korg synths are very different, they share a similar design philosophy in that it's very hands-on. But the TEO-5 and TEO-5 actually has a mod matrix, but it doesn't complicate the workflow, and let me show you. So first up, we're changing the routing of the envelopes. So we have envelope number 1 here freed up to the auxiliary so we can assign it. And then we have envelope number 2 here, and it's to filter an amp. And by playing with the envelope here, we are changing the way the filter responds. Not too bad. Now let's turn down the level of oscillator number 1. So this is a difference between, for example, the Minilogue, where you actually have knobs for the level of the oscillators. Here you just hold down a button and turn it down. It's very quick. The UI is super responsive. That's not always the case for synths, so that's something I like. So without the sub, and with the sub. And here's the difference with the Minilogue. It doesn't have a sub. You'd have to use one of the two oscillators and tune it down if you wanted to act like a sub. By moving the resonance knob, we're of course getting some nice little tones. And what we could do is we could just assign this to something. So let's take LFO number 1 here. We'll just hold down source here, turn LFO number 1, destination, turn resonance. And that's how quickly you set up a mod. We increase the amount. And if you go to the program menu, also very quick and easy to access, you can slew the LFO, basically making it a little bit more gentle. Let's add in some reverb and now let's add in oscillator number 2, and I'm gonna detune it a bit. And I'm not sure if there's a quick command for detuning oscillator number 1. I haven't found it, but in the programs menu, you can just scroll here and pretty quickly find oscillator 1 detuning. So let's detune that as well. So what I want to do is I'm going to turn down the noise level all the way to 0, and I'm going to set up a source, envelope number 1 here, destination, noise, and then just turn up the value here. Increasing the attack, increasing decay, sustain. Don't max it out, because if you do, it will just create a very long movement. And instead, if you turn down the sustain a bit, it'll go up and then down a bit and then flow out. And then by setting the amount of modulation, we are controlling the level of the noise going in and out of the sound. And we can turn on oscillator number 2 as well, that we've detuned. And in the program menu, we can change from white noise to pink noise, and we could just turn up the vintage knob a bit. This introduces a little bit of pitch instability and changes, I believe, to the envelope timings and things like that. And we also have overdrive, which we can turn up a little bit. And we can turn on the effect here. We got delays, chorus, flanger, phasers, and some lo-fi effects. Ring mod, I believe there is as well. I think that the effects are just okay, nothing to write home about. And we also have pressure, for example, so aftertouch on the keyboard that we can assign. We have the mod here that we can assign. We can use velocity of the keyboard to modulate stuff, and also do something which is actually very useful. We can modulate the mod amount. So mod slot number 1 amount can be modulated using something. This is very useful for making very complex sounds. The mod matrix also allows for modulation of the LFO frequency. So we have envelope number 1 set up, and remember the envelope number 1 here is very slow. We have a long attack and a long release. It's going to increase the frequency or speed of LFO number 2 kind of slowly, and then stay there for a while and then decrease. So by turning up the attack all the way here, we can just hear it. You can hear how it's self-oscillating in the background, and then when I let go, it slows down so. And this is what makes a mod matrix so versatile. And that's one of the huge differences between something more affordable like the Minilogue or Minilogue XD. It just doesn't have that freedom or flexibility when it comes to sound design. And just to make things a little bit more wild, I've set LFO number 1 here to random, and I'm using it to modulate the depth of mod 7. What was mod 7? Well, if we go back here, that was envelope number 1 controlling the frequency of LFO number 2. So now we're starting to create chains of modulations that impact other modulations. And we're also going to select source here, going to take this envelope here, destination, oscillator to level, and increase it a bit. And as always, tweak the filter a little bit and So the difference between a well-designed synthesizer and a not so well-designed is not, for example, the existence of menus. It's how quick the menus are, how easy they are to operate, and how they interact with the buttons. As you can see here, it's very quick to set up a modulation. Just think of what you want controlling something, for example, the LFO, and you just hit source, turn the button, and then hit destination and whatever it is you want to control, like the cutoff of the filter, for example. It's that quick and easy. And that's what separates a good synthesizer design from a more mediocre one. Now, a few critical thoughts about the workflow. There are a few things on the TEO-5 that aren't like super quick to get at. For example, there is, as far as I know, no shortcut for the voice spread. So basically you set up a mod from voice spread to panning. So in the mod matrix as well as the program menu, there are a couple of hidden gems like that. And the reason why I'm mentioning voice spreading, for example, is because this is a major difference between something like the Minilogue, for example, which isn't stereo. And even the Minilogue XD, while it has a stereo output because it has stereo effects, it's not actually stereo. You can't pan the individual voices like you can on a more expensive analog synth like this. And let me just play one other patch example here that I made, a bit inspired by Jeremy Red Means Recordings videos on the TEO-5. So big thank you, Jeremy, for the inspiration. So on this sound we have the arpeggiator running. And the filter is set to bandpass. And in the sound you can also hear, a bit exaggerated right now, but you can hear the noise working like a percussive element. So let's start by explaining the rhythmic noise. So we have envelope number 1 over here. It's set up to loop, basically meaning that we've turned the envelope into a slightly more advanced LFO that we have a bit more control over using these knobs. And we're using that to control the level of the noise. We also have random, so a random modulation, and it's set up here to envelope 1 sustain. So when the sustain increases, we get a longer sustain of the noise, but randomly. And using the decay knob, we can actually change how fast the noise repeats. Now there's a few other interesting things going on here with this sound. For example, we have the X mod here. So this is the through 0 FM. And if I increase it, we introduce some metallic madness. So I don't have a lot of the X mod, but I do have a couple of mods set up to handle it. For example, we have LFO number 2 here set up to increase the level of oscillator 2, which is the, I guess, the source for the X mod. It's using oscillator number 2 here to modulate oscillator number 1. And I also have random again to the X mod level, so it randomly goes up a bit. And I'm not gonna make a through 0 FM tutorial for you right here and now. I'll just explain it like this. On a synth like the Minilogue, for example, we have cross modulation, which means that you can use one oscillator to modulate another oscillator, frequency modulate it. And on a digital synth, like say an OP6, for example, this is very precise, which gives you these very bell-like tones. But on an analog synth, FM is usually less precise because the oscillators are analog and therefore they're not as stable. And with traditional FM, what happens is you're using the frequency of one oscillator to modulate the frequency of the other oscillator, and this will impact the pitch quite a bit. And as you can hear, if you add in a bit, you get an interesting result. But if you add in too much, it starts to get wonky and out of tune very quickly. Whereas with the True Zero FM, we get a difference in timbre, but less so in pitch. And it's very interesting as a sound design tool, I think. Something which also impacts the cross-modulation sound is, of course, the pitch of the two oscillators. I just want to mention one thing here, which I touched on briefly earlier. If we go to source, and this is something which sets a synth like the TEO-5 apart from, say, the more affordable synths, like the Minilogue, for example. And that is that in this mod matrix, we can actually assign a modulation to the individual parameters of an envelope. And in this sound, we have set up LFO number 1 to control the decay here of the sound. And if I turn up the filter, you can hear with it being set to 0, got a very short sound. Let's turn up the modulation. And this is what sets synths like this and the Minilogue apart from a lot of the competition. There are just not that many obstacles in the way of experimenting with sound. You can even set up modulations to control the effects parameters. So here we have LFO number 2 controlling the feedback of the BBD delay and LFO number 1 controlling the depth. And it can also get really mad. But stop, you get the idea. It can get really crazy quickly. So should you buy the TEO-5 or something less expensive like the Minilogue XD? Well, honestly, only you and your wallet can decide that. But I will say this, the TEO-5 and Take-5 are excellent synthesizers, among the best I've tried. But it is a lot of money and you can definitely have fun with a less expensive synthesizer. So that was my video on the TEO-5, and as always, I hope you enjoyed the video. Make sure to check out today's sponsor linked in the description. And as always, I hope you have a great day. Talk to you later.